Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and event techies. My name is Tess and this is the Event Tech Pull-Up. I'm from iSocial Execution, and my partner in crime is boom.
Keith Johnston, Planner Wire, Managing Partner, i3 Events.
Keith.
That was my James Bond voice.
I loved it. Keith, hasn't it been a wild week? I mean, I'm just saying. We always kick off with news, but it has been a wild week. You have event procs all over who are not only trying to figure out what they missed by way of income, trying to apply for loans for things, right? Hopefully forgiveness loans, unemployment, any of those things. Trying to create consortiums, collectives, all kinds of things to bring business back for our new normal future, or whatever that is going to look like, right, as we are able to connect that. And then there's just like the basic things, when do I go to the bathroom after being on Zoom for so long?
And there's a whole lot of them that were yelling about my post from the one that you mentioned last week.
Well, see, they should remember I outed you first, so I guess it's my fault. But you're the one who hit send when you posted it, which I think is phenomenal. So hopefully, for those of you all who don't know what we're talking about, you'll go over to Planner Wire's blog and take a look at all of the action that's been going on from there.
Yes. Anyway, I need to get away from that for a little while.
Okay. All right. So on to the news of the day. What's our first one, Keith?
So the big tech news, I think, the thing that excited me the most this week is the announcement that Facebook will be rolling out free video calling for up to 50 people.
Did you say video calling? Okay,
yes, so that they have a new feature called Messenger Rooms, which will yes. Now, do I think from a meetings and events standpoint and from a boardroom standpoint, is this thing, does it make an impact on that? So does it impact the Digitels and the Zooms of the world? No, probably not. But I think on a day-to-day basis, I think that so many people are familiar and are used to Facebook. It actually will help those other entities in the long run because it's going to get more people comfortable with using their devices to do video.
Absolutely.
So I think that rather than, the Zooms of the world shouldn't look at this as competition. It's kind of almost like a gateway drug into those other platforms. It will make that guy or gal that sits at the head of the board table more comfortable with doing a virtual event because they're now going to get used to doing video.
Absolutely. I mean, you could probably do it in groups. You could group people together and do it with all of the affinity groups that you already have in place. For those of you who do remember or don't remember, Facebook owns WhatsApp, which is my favorite tech known to man. Most people don't realize that, but that is. You can do video calls in there with the groups that you have currently. And you can do audio messages as well. So with Facebook on the Messenger side, which is, as Keith said, this is going through Messenger. This is just kind of like amps it up and lets you do a little bit more engaging to that. So that's cool.
And you've got a cool news item, I know.
And
it's a fun one.
This is really fun. So I hope I pronounce everything right. So Borussia, so I'm going to say Borussia, and I'm not going to say the next one because I might mess this up. Mönchengladbach.
Perfect.
Fans, so we'll just say Borussia fans have paid for cardboard cutouts, get that, cardboard cutouts of themselves to fill the stadium in Bundesliga official matches, and they will resume behind closed doors. So they'll be able to do the matches and the games, right? So with the fans in the seats, instead of them physically sitting in
with these cutouts,
they got these little cutouts.
And now we can't see it, but I'm going to put up a nice picture of this so that everyone can see this if they're watching this on YouTube.
Absolutely.
it is really cool.
And as of yesterday, Keith, guess what? They had 2,000 already in place, and it need at least another 6,000 on the way. So
that is cool.
Imagine that. So, but that brings into account some elements, though, Keith, if you think about it, right? So they would have had to use some sort of technology as the team to communicate out to the fans. Hey, you can't physically come to us, but hey, this is a way in which you can use technology to create these cutouts of yourself, right? So there's some printer, so they've fueled the local economy, because you know how I am about thinking local. They fueled the local economy to send these to them so they have the printouts done. And then someone physically was able to go in and place them in the seat that they purchased. How creative is that?
Very cool. It you know what? It's fun. And you know what? I think right now, everyone anywhere needs just a touch of fun.
Just a touch of fun. Just a touch of fun. A little bit.
Which is a nice segue into my next one, which is there's no fun. Which is, I read in a couple different places, but it was Miami Herald who did the initial. It's a story about COVID-19 and cruise ships. And I have actually planned a number of conferences on cruise ships. I think 3, which isn't a plethora, but it's more than one. But reading through it, it's actually pretty sobering. And I think that we should learn from it, right? Because large convention hotels, especially ones that are, the only game in town, right? You go to some places, on the West Coast where the hotel is where people go, right? Whether it's in Mexico, but that's it, right? They get there and they stay there for multiple days.
Right.
I think we need to learn from this, because I think that going forward, once we start to come out of COVID-19 and people start to meet again, you don't want, all these people from all over the globe going to this one property where they're there for days and days and days, and then they bring it back home. And because wave 2 is coming, I guess don't be the one that starts wave 2.
Right. Exactly. I mean, all of this was prophesized many, many, many years ago from people, I don't want to talk about that piece, but it's been prophesized. So we do have to get ready for the fact that if another wave comes, when another wave comes, is the space that I'm trying to live in, because I don't want to live in a space that thinks that this is just it and, absolute. We do need to be ready. And our hotels at the sea, as we call cruise ships, that industry is just, I really feel bad for them. So hopefully we can look at
that industry.
Absolutely. We can look at maybe repurposing some of those cruise ships into, as, we will talk about a little later in our segment, which I'm really excited about, a public and private partnership of refitting, re-outfitting, or rethinking about how we do business.
And who's coming up in our next segment?
Oh my gosh, Keith. How in the world did we do this? But we have landed on Congressperson, and yes, I did say person, Congressperson Mike Quigley. I am excited to have him here.
And I am a fanboy, so there you go.
Well, I'm really excited because he has chosen to put his efforts towards the intelligence community, cybersecurity, and the like. And for those of you who know, I'm extra geeky-ish, closet geek, real geek. So we're really happy to have him.
You're the real deal when it comes to geek.
I can't do all the things that real geeks do, but I'm working on it, believe me. We're in my mind. We're
trying.
Definitely. So, Keith, without further ado, we're going to move to our next segment. So I am going to introduce to you Congressperson Mike Quigley, who is the U.S. Representative for Illinois' 5th Congressional District, which includes Chicago's North Side, and I am from Chicago's South Side, as well as several other cities of the western suburbs. As a member of Congress, he serves on the Appropriations Committee and the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. As part of the Select Committee, he is also on the Subcommittee for Strategic Technologies and Advanced Research. In addition, he also teaches environmental policy and Chicago politics at Loyola University. And if I could also say, he spends time with the lovely kids of Chicago and we're very happy to have him.
Thank you.
So
here.
Yes, we're actually very glad that you took time out of your busy schedule. We know that things in DC, you guys actually have a lot on your plate. So again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us.
You know, for those who watched the NFL draft, I think the highlight was kids and dogs in the background, seeing people's different backgrounds. It's behind me is a painting, is a photograph taken in 1863 of the Capitol Dome being constructed in Washington, D.C. At a difficult time in our nation's history, we were building a dome symbolizing all that we were trying to accomplish at the same time. So I guess it's appropriate that it's there now as we go through another trying time.
Yeah, and this actually it hasn't been an easy time for all industries, and Tess and I speak to our industry, but I think that it's been hit hard. But Tess, I'll let you go ahead and get us started because I know that totally lost my train of thought. So Tess, go ahead.
No, let me say this too. As you mentioned that, let me just say that I think the mistake that people make is that they don't understand that before all the other Roman numerals in this outline, the heading is and will be, this is a public health crisis.
Yes.
Right? This CARES Act that we passed a month ago and the follow-up 3.5 that we passed just a couple of days ago, they aren't stimulus measures. They are public health measures. They are survival measures from a health point of view and from an economic point of view. I mean, there's a reason that there's $150 billion for hospitals and healthcare providers and protections and testing in the first and billions more in the second measure. If anyone thinks they can effectively talk about recovery, economic revival after this without getting the virus under control, they're just mistaken and they're going to make big mistakes. And what we're seeing across the world and the country is those who forget about that, they're going to trip up. So I want the economy rolling as quickly as possible. It's impossible for that to take place. And it won't happen until we get the virus in check. And that begins with testing and taking care of our providers and those most vulnerable in our society. Obviously, the measure does other things that we can talk about that restores people and maintains people's economic viability. It extends and expands unemployment insurance. We can talk about PPP and other small business measures as well as helping the airlines and so forth. But none of those things matter. And it's frankly money wasted long-term until we get the virus in check.
Well, I really appreciate you giving us that intro and setting the tone for the things and the questions that we have for you today, because I think they blend really, really well. So our first question to you is, can we think about our business in the events business and about bringing people together, which we do on an ongoing basis for many years, but we know now we must stay apart. There's this coined term of social distancing, if you will. And it's frustrating for Americans, especially in our industry, who we talk to all the time. And it's divided us whether or not we should open the country or not, or open businesses or not. So some have chosen to take this to the streets, like in Michigan, which is not far from you in your area, or hurl racist text messages to the Atlanta mayor, which is my mayor, Keisha Bottoms, and towards her 12-year-old son. And in addition, even reopening the state of Georgia, which my governor, Kemp, has done. So what can we do to get our country on the same page when many of them refuse to rely on the science, the facts, and even so history? And I'm so glad you mentioned the photograph in the back, because that's a historical time in our U.S. And I think people forget about what happened back then to defeat our common viral enemy, as we mentioned. So we begin to create a new future, not backwards, but a new future.
Sure. Look, and again, it's appropriate to have the Capitol under construction in the background because the president at the time was attempting to appeal to the better angels of our nature. And that's what we must do. Look, it's not going to sink in with everyone, but it's clear when we look at the science and the facts, that this is a very dangerous virus, extraordinarily transmissible, and there's still a lot we don't know. We don't know for sure if it's endemic. We don't know what's going to happen in the fall. We don't know when we're going to get a vaccine. We are learning things from Asia and other countries that we don't know for sure that you can't get the virus again, but that the antibodies may or may not help. So with all those also teaching us in other countries that when the numbers go down because of physical distancing, as soon as they bring people back together, those numbers are bumping right back up. We were attempting to flatten the curve for a reason. That wasn't to overwhelm our hospital healthcare system. Chicago totally revamped McCormick Place as really a large hospital almost overnight. And fortunately, that hasn't been needed. But if we go too quickly without the proper systems in place, we'll devastate our healthcare system, and any hope of recovery will be put back for a significant period of time. So obviously, we have to be smart about this, educate and inform the public to the extent possible. And you're right, it's going to get tougher as the weather gets warmer. People are getting cabin fever and want to get out. We're going to have to find creative ways to stagger the economy open and to allow for physical distancing and still have social interaction that takes place at the exact same time. It is a very tough needle to thread at this time, but we've absolutely got to be smart about this because the dangers are extraordinary here.
Yeah, well, and and I'll piggyback on that question. You're absolutely right. We don't want to open up too quickly, because if you go right into an event like a CES, Consumer Electronics Show, or what I was at earlier this year, right at the beginning of the year, the International Builder Show, you're talking 100,000, 200,000 people coming in from all over the world. And then they're going back to their respective homes, and you don't want this thing, to spin back out of control. In a lot of places, Illinois, for example, we are flattening the curve. We are getting it down, and that's the trend we need to do. And I think it is my hope that everyone in the industry can understand that, and will not rush back to, having a lot of these events as soon as possible, because it may not be the best move.
And I want to remind, I think I'm speaking to the choir here, but when we see folks out on beaches again, for someone who thinks, well, I'm 21, 22, I'm healthy, I don't have this, it's inherently selfish. The fact of the matter is, you could be a spreader and bring it back to people who are far more vulnerable, people who are older, comorbidity. We also understand the nursing homes. So to get back to that place, as we stagger this economy open, phase it back open, we're going to have three things: testing, testing, and testing. Relations to that are tracing, but also at the same time, we don't have the systems in place to protect our most vulnerable, right? Those with these comorbidities, particularly, and this is reflecting the inequality in our country, frankly, people of color who are disproportionately being impacted by the virus. We don't have the systems in place to protect them. We should probably be doing closer to 1 million tests that would a day instead of the numbers we're at. Those at the front lines of the healthcare, providing healthcare, those who are first responders, and those, frankly, who are checking you out at the grocery store and making deliveries and so forth. But again, we don't have those systems in place. And for those who are anxious to move back, to open this up, even if you're not putting yourself at risk, you're putting so many others at risk to increase the death levels.
Yeah. So, and to spin us in you had talked a little bit earlier about the PPP. Like most large industries, the meetings and event space, we have a lot of giants, right? We got the Marriotts and the C-Events and the PSAVs of the world that have access to programs and capital markets, to help them through the rough times. And after the first round of, I guess we didn't want to call it stimulus, but, many of the smaller event production companies, the independent planners and the event tech startups, kind of felt forgotten, right? They would get into, try to get into Chase or Bank of America, whatever it was. And they weren't able to get in and access any of that because, you had companies like Ruth's Chris, and again, that's a very small part of a larger package. But, how will the new stimulus package, how do you want it to help those smaller companies that are in the industry so that when we come out of this at some point, and we will, so that they can keep their doors open because they are a large part of the meetings and events industry?
Sure. I mean, in the measure we passed this week, we had a little more thought and understanding and practice. That first CARES Act was passed within the 9-day period. Here you're passing a couple $2 trillion, an extraordinary amount of money, but we were being told by some of the leading economic and financial experts in the world that every dollar spent then was as important as $4 spent a month later, because the need was so acute and we needed to restore and protect people at that point in time. So we understood that, and there were a lot of gaps. I do want the industry to know from top to bottom that we understand there's still gaps, there's still ways to go. As the Democratic caucus meets in situations very similar to this, it is all the discussion how to capture and protect everyone in the economy. So this 3.5 measure we passed restores and adds a lot of money. The total is $483.4 billion. So it restores the money that PPP and other programs have in their pockets to allow the banks to continue this. But it also has a couple set-asides. $60 billion of this pot is set aside for smaller lenders, underbanked communities, the acronym CDFIs and MDIs and others. So we tried to make sure that there was money set aside from them. But we're learning that even within that group that are going to be eligible for that $60 billion, there are groups that are underfunded who aren't going to be able to have the thresholds that are in this law. So we're hoping that we go back again in May and pass what we would call 4.0, which will be a larger, bigger bill, including infrastructure, for example, that sets aside language and includes specific details that only CDFIs and some of the other non-traditional bank lenders. I get it. Groups like yours, but also with our district, we hear, and it's true in everybody's neighborhood, there's candy stores, dry cleaners, pizza parlors, bike shops. And, the banks weren't obviously running to go take care of those smaller loans. We need people eligible for $5 or $10 or $15 or $20,000 loans all the way up. Also, we're hoping in the next week or two, there is a combination of the Fed and Treasury. They're going to be opening up the Main Street loan program. That's going to be from $1 million and up. And it's going to be for companies that have payrolls larger than 500. So they're not eligible for the SBA. So that's another gap here that we're hoping gets taken up. And there'll be a lot of reserves and opportunities there for lending. We still recognizing within that group that they need some of this forgivable loans. We're trying to modify those programs as well. What the businesses are telling me was there's an emergency grant program for $10,000 that's forgivable. And that's really important. For a lot of people in your industry and people who aren't, as you say, really well capitalized, that's an extraordinary help right at the beginning. They don't want to just add debt. Right. And as you know, the PPP program will forgive almost the entire loan if you meet thresholds of people you keep on the payroll. So the point's well taken. What we need is ongoing communication with all the industries, including yours. Let us know, what are we missing? What do we still have to do? We recognize that we're going to be addressing this need probably for the next several years.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue to my next one. Thank you so much for that. And it's really talking about our industry and the fact that we run on data, which I know is a sweet spot for you, and a lot of it. And our websites, our apps, they collect a lot and loads of data from attendees when you kind of think about information before and then, post, or if I call that's now post COVID-19. And everyone, including your grandma, is typing their personal information into phones, tablets, you name it.
I got my 85-year-old mom on Zoom last night.
See. And with the new security measures, she's got to type her name and email address, right? And then we think of GDPR, which Keith and I are very much in favor of, and we watched that whole thing evolve. And while not it's a perfect system, because nothing is perfect when it's new, but it was a step in the right direction in protecting that personal information. So our question is, should the federal government play a role in creating the standards, or should we let the states handle it, like, for instance, what happened in California?
Look, California is so huge in its economy compared to a worldwide basis. Obviously, it was important that they do this. But as you're aware, this is a globalized economy, and clearly anything through the internet in and around is going to be involved at the same time. So I guess the better way for me to answer is to say that the federal government has to play a role.
Yeah.
The problem is we're not there yet. All right, we saw what took place in Europe, and again, while not perfect, was an important first step. Same is true in California. The bad news is, I think Senator Cantwell introduced, I just lost, there we go. So Senator Cantwell did introduce legislation addressing this, the Consumer Privacy Act in November. I'll be honest, it's got a long way to go. There's such competing factions here, and I don't think there's agreement within the Republican Party. I don't think there's agreement within the Democratic Party. So it's something we absolutely have to do. It's an amazing parallel because cybersecurity and the issues that you're talking about in these privacy acts are all playing out at the same time. And the tragedy of the virus is it's forcing us to think about all these things as we address them. As 9/11 did, and as the Russians' attack on our democratic process did, it had to do with cybersecurity and privacy issues all playing out at the same time. They're extremely important and complicated, and we have to think about our protection of the economy, our own privacy, and those that would attack it. So the final point to this is one of the things the virus taught us is that this is only going to be effective if we're coordinating and communicating with the rest of the world. The reason this has gone as poorly as it has so far, in part, is because there was not good communication, there was not good coordination between us and our world partners. And clearly there hasn't been on a state, national, even local level. And so that same type of activity has to take place when we develop privacy protections that you talk about with what this law would be.
Yeah, and and to the infrastructure that's going to come afterward, right? And again, yeah, I guess when the whole building or when the whole forest is on fire, which fire do you fight first? I guess, but other countries right now, at least up until COVID-19, were actually surpassing us. I say steamrolling right over us when it comes to upgrading the technology infrastructure. I think the U.S. ranks somewhere about 15th in average internet speeds. What role can the federal government play, as we get forward to keep on technology infrastructure to keep us competitive, so that the large internet, when this is all over, those large international conferences, are going to look at us to come and spend their dollars rather than going to Spain or to the UK or Asia. What role can the government play?
Look, we saw with 4G just what it meant for our economy and how the United States led the way. The concerns we have is with 5G, China is so far ahead of us. And I see 5G advertised on billboards and so forth. I go, what are they talking about?
Yes. Keith and I say it all the time.
We are not close to being there. And it's deceptive to tell the American people that they're using 5G.
Right.
The matter is, we are way behind China, and the two other companies that, at the very least, you could consider competing with China are not U.S.-based companies. And our companies seem to be doing very, very well on profits, but they are not leading the way on innovation. So I think your point is well taken. As you know, I serve on the Intelligence Committee. It is an extreme concern of the entire committee and the intelligence community that we're behind, because this isn't just an economic driver. It has a lot to do with our security, our national security. So the federal government, as it did with a lot of the things we look at, right? We think of moonshot. We give these things terms, the Green New Deal. We give them grandiose terms of things that we did as a country in a dramatic fashion. And to your point, a lot of that was based on what the federal government did. We don't go to the moon without NASA. So it's a public-private partnership, but the federal government has to play a major role in a Manhattan-like project, to give it another comparison. It's going to take that kind of effort and those kind of resources to compete. And frankly, right now we're not. It is an economic concern, and it is a national security concern. And we're talking about a big infrastructure deal next, 4.0. It makes all the sense in the world to include this in that package. If we're going to do something big, do it now. At the time of our greatest economic downturn in our nation's history, the Great Depression, we built big. We can do the same thing right now.
Well, when it comes to technology, I just think about, in a perfect world, wouldn't it be nice? We have, all of these people in technology and that aren't working. Wouldn't it be great if they could kind of just turn that toward the greater good?
Right.
If we could find a way, to get them out there, improving the technology infrastructure for the whole country. It would be great.
We're hearing about kids remote learning in a parking lot. It's the only way they can get an internet. Their parents are driving them to a parking lot near a building that has access to the internet. They get Wi-Fi, and they can get their lessons for the day. That's just an inequality that has to end, but it's also setting us back, competing against the rest of the world.
Yeah,
definitely.
Tess, I know we did have a question from someone who watches the show.
We do. Do you mind if we can take a question from our audience?
Sure. All right.
Okay. Perfect. So one of our listeners and viewers, if you will, her name is Rachel Voss. She's CEO of Syzygy Cities. And I want to tell you a little bit about them because it really does tie into some of the things that you talked about earlier. So Syzygy Cities is a public and private partnership project developer, and they drive innovative business strategies and partnerships to tackle pressing social challenges by aligning government initiatives, business objectives, and community needs. So it's kind of that spoke that brings them all together. And they developed a pilot project, which we're really excited to talk about and hear, that will build a blueprint to convert hotels into skilled nursing telemedicine facilities to help struggling hospitals accommodate the quarantine and treatment for COVID cases, which are projected for the second wave of COVID-19 if it comes, and we probably, people are saying that they are.
Fall is coming.
Fall is coming. And Syzygy will help to pivot this, the event production and logistics and communication aspects of it by really truly leaning into our industry, the meetings industry, and all the skill sets that we have of moving projects forwards, planning logistics, event technology. So kind of all of what we do to help these things happen. So her question is, we have largely loosened our HIPAA laws meant to protect patients in light of COVID-19 so that we could swiftly implement telehealth solutions. This will both innovate medicine and leave it vulnerable. In this wartime economy, the private sector has stepped up with solutions, but there are fears from the public around regulation. Knowing what we know now, how would you design the right way for the future of PPP? How would the process, infrastructure, and operations look for the private sector aligned to align and partner with the public sector? So this enables a strong, dynamic, efficient, and impactful execution. So I know that's a lot. And then if you could talk about possibly the protecting the innovations from physical and digital vulnerabilities. So in a sense.
Look, passing legislation is extraordinarily difficult. With pluralistic society, a lot of different views of what should take place in the world. You've got to get a majority of 435, a majority of 100 in the Senate, which is very tough to do and get the president to agree to it. And you've got to pass that measure. And most legislation passes as an evolution. And because it takes so much time, the technology changes behind it. In the meantime, the scenery is changing behind us at the same time. The real world changes. So when you pass measures like, the HIPAA laws dealing with privacy, no one was thinking about these possibilities of telemedicine or anything that's happening right now. So when legislation has to change with the times, it's extraordinarily difficult to get that consensus and to do it so it still fits the needs of today. So that's going to be the challenge here. I still think we can do it. I still think we can protect privacy. But look, we were talking about telemedicine before the virus got here. There were real concerns in my state, Illinois, of a bunch of rural hospitals closing down. And those threats are still there. Obviously, they're getting strained considerably due to the virus, but they were economically anyway, and that's a situation across the country. But you also want people to have access to the same quality healthcare, and telemedicine is a big step in that direction. So we've got to help fund this and the research that goes with it, and we've got to change the laws and try to balance them to meet the need of what we're facing today. But it's another example of how the virus pushes us to do something that, perhaps we were or were not doing before, but it forces that need and pushes us to get something done. The old expression, never waste a crisis, truly comes into play here.
Yeah.
Actually, Tess actually mentioned, you said that same thing yesterday.
I did. I definitely did. It's all about what the new, how do we think locally, turn those efforts toward local and fueling that economy, but then also, this is fertile ground for creativity. And how do we go up from now?
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Tess, you want to wrap us up?
Absolutely. So, Congressman Quigley, do you have a closing statement for our audience and our listeners? And then we'll close you out.
I know it's difficult because the difference between this and other crises we've faced and what we're used to is, if this was a flood, you would go and meet together and you'd fill sandbags and you could comfort each other. You could be close to each other, right? After a tornado, you can help people pick up the pieces of their life and literally put their house and their home and their family back together. And again, you could comfort people. This is forcing us against our basic instincts of wanting to be together to take care. After 9/11, it said, be brave, get on a plane, or go out to eat, drive the economy. Here we're forced to do what seems counterintuitive and the antithesis of what our heart tells us to do. So it's a challenge and it's very frustrating. And a lot of people are facing extremely difficult times. And there's such a degree of uncertainty there. At this point in time, we have to, as you said, get creative, but appeal to the better angels of our nature, as we said, be smart, educate and inform each other, and move forward. We are going to get through this. I think the reason it's this difficult right now is it was dramatically underestimated. It took a long time for this to sink in. The Saturday before Thanksgiving, the restaurants and bars in my neighborhoods were packed, were people nose to nose as this virus was starting to hit. And just now, I think the public gets it. So we're going to do our part, but we need to hear from the people in your industry. What are we missing? What else do we need to do? What else can we do to help?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Representative Quigley, for taking time to spend with our audience. And I want to, again, thank you for the things that you're doing from a heart place for us on a local, state, as well as a national level.
Well, I tell people, stay close, but not too close.
Exactly.
Exactly. And for our audience, this has been the Event Tech Pull-Up. My name is Tess Vismel from iSocial Execution, and my partner in crime is...
Keith Johnston.
He's from I3 Events. We thank you.
Thanks, Tess.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, audience, thank you so much for being with us today on the Event Tech Pull-Up. Please remember to share with your tribe, eventtechpullup.com. That's eventtechpullup.com. Our anchor hashtag is Event Tech Pull-Up, and our secondary hashtag is Pull Up With Us. Again, I am Tess from iSocialX, and this is
Keith with i3 Events.
We're happy to have you. Thank you. Have a great day.